Today, I'm going to be talking about the 3 most offensive words in the English language. 3 words that if I said them to you, you would immediately feel alienated, defensive, angry. You might look at me and think of everything you wanted to say back as a retort. I've never heard these 3 words ever without having a very negative reaction. And yet, I'm going to suggest to you this morning there are 3 words that we as Seventh-day Adventists need to say a lot more. I'll tell you what the words are, but first a story. When I became a parent, I learned that I had a superpower. I couldn't leap tall buildings or spin webs. I couldn't fly or anything like that. But what I did find is that I could tell the future. Not in big epochs of history kind of way, but in very important ways. Let me illustrate. One day we're at the table eating spaghetti. One of my daughters gets up, I won't say which one, she wanders away from the table, and I say, "Where are you going, darling?" She says, "I'm going to go sit on the couch in the living room. It's more comfortable." And I say, "No. Don't go and eat spaghetti on the white linen couch." Because there has never been a person who is able, especially a child, to eat spaghetti on a white linen couch without what? Getting spaghetti. See, I can see the future. I get a work call. I go into my office. The call goes on. I come out. I walk by the white linen couch, and "Darling, I need to talk with you." We go over to the white linen couch. I point to the evidence of disobedience, and I say the 3 most offensive words you could ever say to somebody. I point at those spots and I say, "Told you so." Told you so. Have you ever had anyone say "told you so" to you and you felt good about it? Have you ever said, "Oh yeah, you did tell me so. I was a fool, I didn't listen to you"? No way. When somebody tells you "told you so," the first reaction is, "Argh," especially when it's true. That makes it even worse. And yet, I believe as Seventh-day Adventist Christians in the world that we live in right now, it's time to remember the 3 one-syllable words, "told you so." This last American summer or northern summer, Lisa, my wife, and I and our son Boyi, no, not our son Boyi, our daughter Sky, went to England. I love to go to England. I enjoy history. Probably some of you do too. I love to study the stories of history. And one of the guys who has the most interesting story is Winston Churchill. I've read his History of the English-Speaking People, 5-volume set. I've read William Manchester's masterful 3-volume biography of Churchill. And I've been to some of the places where Churchill lived and worked and did his amazing things. But one place I have never been before is his home, his personal home called Chartwell. Chartwell is a difficult place to visit, and that's why I never visited. You need to take the whole day because there's no public transport nearby. It's far enough out of London that you kind of have to dedicate yourself to the venture. So this time I said to Lisa, on this trip, this is my one ambition. We're going to go see Chartwell because so much happened there. And I also wanted to see the home because it has a little bit of an interesting story of its own. You see, Winston Churchill went out one day, and he saw Chartwell, and he did something that seemed very sensible to him. He bought it. And then he came home to his wife, Clementine. He said, "Darling, I bought a house today. Apparently, that is not the thing to do, guys. I'm not a marriage therapist, but apparently going out and buying a very expensive house that you can't afford in a place that's very difficult to get to is not a way to win the hearts and minds of your spouse. I thought it was a little bit churlish of her, though, to criticize the house because it's quite beautiful and it's on a beautiful land, but she never liked the house. I got out there and I saw exactly what she was talking about because the house does look great on the outside, but inside it's kind of a rabbit warren kind of house. It's being built on and there's little rooms and it's all over the place and there's not enough natural light and, well, maybe Churchill should have listened to his wife. But it's in that house that Churchill struggled with immense challenges of his day. You'll remember that in September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. And for a while, nothing happened. People were wondering, it's almost like a Cold War. Until 1940, in May, when Germany rolled into France, cornered the British and French troops at Dunkirk, and all of a sudden, Britain was isolated in the world, facing the most fearsome army in the history of Europe, arguably. And the German Luftwaffe, the Air Force, started pounding the British. In fact, they got to a point where there was a question of whether they were going to be able to survive because the German bombers were coming over and taking out all the aircraft factories, the airports where the RAF, the Royal Air Force, was based. They were shooting down so many British planes that the question was, how long could Britain hold out? And the American ambassador to Britain at the time was a guy by the name of Joseph Kennedy, one of the richest men in America, and the father of John F. Kennedy. And Ambassador Kennedy in the Boston Sunday Globe in 1940 said, democracy is finished in England. It's a done deal. It's over for Britain. He told President Roosevelt in the United States and other American officials that he believed that Britain had no chance whatsoever of victory. And it wasn't just Kennedy who was thinking this. There was a guy by the name of King Edward VIII, King Edward VIII, who had been forced to abdicate because he'd married an American divorcee. Times have changed. So he had now become the Duke of Windsor, and Edward was having very unusual conversations with Hitler. He went over and toured Germany, and he wrote a note to the Führer. The Duchess of Windsor and I would like to thank you sincerely. Our trip through Germany has made a great impression on us. Many thanks to you for the wonderful time we had with you. You ever write something that you subsequently regretted? But it was worse than that. There were conversations going on about Britain's weakness with German spies. And in fact, there's strong evidence that Edward was conspiring in the hopes that if Britain fell to Germany, he would regain the throne. The brother of the king. One of the German spies wrote, the Duke definitely believes that continued and severe bombing will make England ready for peace. Can you imagine the former King of England writing that to your adversary in the middle of a war? At the time when the ambassador from the United States was saying, Britain is finished. The Germans are going to win. The Nazis will get their conquering of the entire of Western Europe. When the former king is conspiring with the invaders, believing that Britain is over as an independent country, there was somebody writing in the United States by the name of Arthur. I'll give you his full name in a second, but you know him as Uncle Arthur. We heard from Uncle Kingston this morning. There's an Uncle Arthur. Do you guys know who Uncle Arthur was? He wrote the bedtime stories. Some of you know this. He also wrote the Bible stories. But Uncle Arthur was more than just a children's storyteller. Not that that's a small thing, it's a big thing. Jesus was also a children's storyteller, so it's a very important function. But he did another thing. He edited the Signs of the Times magazine. And Uncle Arthur, whose full name is Arthur Maxwell, wrote an editorial in the Signs of the Times that said, Hitler will not prevail. Hitler has no chance of victory. Hitler will never achieve his goals. And people at the time said, hey, Arthur, maybe we should tone it down a bit. You know, maybe the ambassador to Britain knows something that you don't. Maybe the former king knows something you haven't considered. But Arthur Maxwell said on Daniel 2, this image that you're all very well aware of, I hope. I don't have time to go into the whole thing, but if you don't, ask Pastor Daniel about it. He's well named to give you the full story. He said that in the image of Daniel 2, we were assured by prophecy that Europe would never be united under a single government. Instead of toning it down, Arthur Maxwell did something very unexpected. His next issue of Signs of the Times was 100% dedicated to this particular issue. And it came out in July 1940. Talk about a terrible time to be talking about the inevitable demise of the Nazis. This was a time when everybody was starting to question everything about the future of Europe. Hitler seemed unstoppable, and the smart money was on his victory. It was just in May that he'd conquered everything. July, Arthur Maxwell makes this statement: how the Nazis will fail, but he's talking about the Nazis in the context, how they will fail, we do not know. We hesitate to even suggest, but of one thing that's absolutely certain, and that is that in prophecy of Daniel 2 will not fail. When the present seemingly irresistible force of the great invader is spent, the old divisions of the Roman Empire will reassert themselves. They shall not cleave one to another. I got a question. If you were writing right after Dunkirk, and when the Germans were blitzing the whole country, would you write something that confident? Or would you say, let's just see how this holds out? Let's just see, maybe we misunderstood something. But Arthur Maxwell proved absolutely right. He wrote that in July. In August, a turning point in the war happened. One Luftwaffe bomber got lost and dropped its bombs on London. Up until that point, they'd been focusing on the air bases and the fuel depots and the aircraft factories. They had the British Air Force on its back foot. But Churchill said, if you're going to bomb London, we're going to show you. So he sent British bombers to bomb Berlin. Hitler was so enraged. He said, forget about the aircraft factories, forget about the airfields, forget about the fuel depots. I want you to start now concentrating the bombing on London. Well, we all have heard the story of the Blitz. It's a terrible, terrible thing. Civilians being bombed night after night. But for a country that was almost defeated, it turned out to be a reprieve, because the British factories could start producing the planes again. They could fix the airfields. They could get their fuel supplies sorted out. They could get back on the front foot, and from that point forward, the RAF was able to prevail. And Hitler's plans, called Operation Sea Lion, to invade Britain, the idea that a few more bombs would bring them to their knees. Prophecy had stated that no power would dominate all of Europe. The best minds of the times thought it would. Arthur Maxwell said, based on biblical prophecy, that was impossible. And prophecy did not fail. Told you so. Told you so. The Bible's not a joke, and prophecy is not something to ignore. Well, we've long way from the Second World War. In more modern times, I went to Newbold College in England. And I had friends who left the Seventh Day Adventist church, and I remember having conversations with some of them during the 1990s. And they said, you know, you told us that the church about this, Europe was not going to become one and all this stuff. But look, it's happening. We have the European Union, and they're moving to greater and greater consolidation. We are going to have a United States of Europe, and you'll see, you and your old-fashioned Bible prophecy at the Adventist church, you guys are out of touch. We have the European Parliament, the European Court, a European currency. Eventually, we're going to have our United States of Europe. It's inevitable. Have you noticed no one's saying that now? In 2026, there was a referendum for the British to leave the European Union. It's always the British, isn't it? By a margin of only 52%, they decided to leave. That's a pretty narrow margin there, 52 to 48. But that was just the beginning. The Carnegie Endowment just recently said the rise of revisionist far-right parties in Europe could unravel the European project itself. As we speak, the Alternative for Deutschland is growing in popularity in Germany, in France. We have Le Pen, who is among the most popular people. All of these are nationalists. They're not looking at the European project for a total solution to their issues. Of course, in Britain, the man who led the Brexit movement, Nigel Farage, is now ahead in the polls. We don't know how that's all going to end, but what we do know is this, that the idea of a United States of Europe is over. This is what Arthur Maxwell said about this back in 1940, but it applies just equally to that concept. It's amazing how many schemes have been laid to unite the nations of Europe. Men have tried treaties. Almost every nation has pledged in some way in every other nation to every other nation. They've tried leagues until it seemed like the peaceful unity was about to be achieved. They've tried intermarriage until every ruling dynasty becomes related to the other, yet every plan has failed. Every bond, durable as they might have seemed when they were made, has snapped under the strain of seething human emotions. They're an emotional bunch, those Europeans, aren't they? Always in all these plans, while there has been in them the strength of iron, there's inevitably appeared the disastrous weakness of clay. They said the United States of Europe was on its way. The institutions were built, the plans were set. People who believed in this old prophecy were completely out of touch and behind the times. They said it was over, a united Europe was inevitable. Today, nobody is saying that. Told you so. Told you so. I'd like to go forward to another prophecy now, found in Revelation 13:11. And behold, a beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. We know from Adventist understanding, and not just Adventist, but more broadly, that that nation is the United States of America. In 1754, Charles Wesley, referring to this lamb-like beast, wrote, "He hasn't come yet, though he cannot be far off, for he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast." We're not the only people who know that there's a timeline to prophecy. He knew when to look for it, but he didn't know what it was going to be. Can you think of any country that came up soon after 1754? Yeah, 1776. What have we got? The beginning of something amazing. J.N. Andrews noted in 1851, no civil power could ever compare with republicanism. That is not the party, but the system of government. It is a lamb-like character. The grand principles recognized by this form of power is expressed in the following: all men are born free and equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, such as liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Was there ever a development of a civil power more lamb-like than this? It's a beautiful expression. And although the United States is a very faulted country, just like every other sinful country, every country in a sinful world, the United States has had a spectacular history. First, they defeated monarchism. I better not say that too loud. I have King Charles giving me a call. But they did. They got rid of the king, and unlike France, where it just devolved into an absolute despotism, in America, they were able to get on and build a great country. They ended slavery. Yes, it was too late, but all over the world, slavery has been a norm throughout thousands of years. You know, it's not very well known, but the United States brought in about 400,000 slaves, which is a blot on the national character and history. But what people don't know is that Brazil brought in 4 million slaves. And Brazil didn't outlaw slavery until almost a quarter of a century after the United States. Not that it's a race, but today, even slavery continues. Major human rights organizations estimate there's somewhere like 28 million people today who are still living in slavery. The United States ended slavery imperfectly, but it's admirable. They also defeated fascism and Nazism. And then they stood up against colonialism. Yeah, it's easy to forget that, but it's true. And then they defeated communism. You know, people don't really talk about the evils of communism anymore. It sort of has gone out of fashion. But about 100 million people were killed by communist regimes. 100 million. America, the lamb-like beast, a force for amazing progress. Not perfect, lots of problems. We can go over every single one of them, but as one of my colleagues once told me, and he was French, so, you know, he wasn't biased. If anything, the French have a complicated relationship with the U.S. and vice versa. But he said to me, James, people say a lot of bad things about America, huh? But who else would you want to have the most power in this world? Who else? Imperfect? Yeah. You want Russia? Well, you can ask the question about anyone. Nobody does great with a huge power, but it's been a pretty good run. And yet, today, as we speak, both the left and the right of American life agree on one thing. Something fundamental has changed in the United States. Big changes are happening. I've lived in the United States for decades. I first went there in 1978. And I can tell you the country has changed. I'm going home to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. I should say, I don't even know if the planes are flying because the government's shut down and they're canceling a bunch of flights. But when I get back to the city that I live in and I love and I work in, there will be troops on the streets. Just a few months ago, a man who lived in the next suburb to me was picked up and sent to El Salvador to a gulag. Now, he might be a bad guy. But the way you do that in our system, and I'm a lawyer by the way, is that you go through a court system and you decide if someone's guilty of something before you punish them. At this time, we're blowing up ships on the high seas that may be drug runners. But normally the way you do this is you try to figure out if they're drug runners before you do the killing. Something has changed, and it's very fundamental. And people on the that's on the right of politics, people point to the abuses and the excesses of the American left, and I can't disagree with them. I can't disagree with them. The left of American politics is pushing noxious ideas as well. Ideas that violate fundamental human rights, particularly the right to life. You know, some of you know that my daughter Shay, who's here, won a mock trial competition at Macquarie University this week, and we're very, very proud of her. She was born at 29 and a half weeks. We were warned that if she was born, she might have problems. And we might want to think very carefully about that. And in some states today, the political left says, you can take the life of a child at 29 weeks. No problem, no questions asked. That's your right. I'm also an adoptive father, as some of you know. I am so glad that God made every life unique and that we have cherished every life that's come into our house. Yes, the left is wrong too, but two wrongs don't make a right. Today, around the world, there are people looking at the United States and asking, what is going on? There's a whole list of countries and whether they think the U.S. is on a force for good. And maybe the most startling one to me is that in Canada, our closest and oldest ally, it's true the United States tried to invade Canada, but that's a long time ago. But that was during the War of 1812, and we're very sorry. But today in Canada, only 19% of Canadians think that the U.S. is a force for good in the world. 19%. If you ask a Canadian, 8 out of 10 will say, something has changed. Just recently, Stephen Miller, a very close advisor, a very powerful advisor in the White House, had this to say: you have no idea the dragon you have awakened. Yeah, the context was in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And he didn't mean it that we're going to oppress or hurt other people. But it was words that echo in my head. Something has changed. The left of American politics agrees with it. The right American politics agree with it. They both point at each other, and I believe they're both right. We were promised, told in Scripture, to expect the lamb-like beast to start speaking like a dragon. I had friends, too, who've left the Adventist church make fun of me for that belief, too. But I believe today we can see this happening in our time. We were told that the lamb-like beast would speak like a dragon. Today it is happening. Told you so. Told you so. Hitler promised a 1,000-year Reich. Ambassador Kennedy and King Edward believed him. Arthur Maxwell did not. Hitler is in the dustbin of history. Told you so. In the midst of European utopians, students of prophecy knew a United States of Europe was impossible. Today, Europe remains like a Tower of Babel. Told you so. When people called the U.S. the last best hope for humanity, a city on a hill, the Bible predicted a very different future. Today, there's only one thing the left and the right agree on. America is no longer the force for good in the world. Told you so. I began by telling you that told you so is the worst, most alienating, most irritating, the worst thing you can possibly say to anyone. But I think it's something that we have to say more often today. People are confused. We're living through incredibly complex times. People are wondering, where do we go next? There's a lot of frustration, alienation, confusion. Seventh-day Adventist Christians know exactly where we are and where we're going. And we know who's in control. But one of the ways that we can get the confidence of people looking for where our message has clarity is by reminding them, this isn't our first rodeo, folks. We have been on the front foot for decades, knowing where we are and where we're going. Maybe today it's time for all of us in our personal lives, in our conversations, in our influence in our society, to be telling the truth. That, well, it's not us, it's Scripture. Well understood by Seventh-day Adventists. Told you so. Dear Lord, I thank you so much for the opportunity to come back to Waitara Church. I thank you for the witness that this church family has been in the community, but also the blessing it's been in my own life. Please be with each one of us. We're heading into very difficult and uncertain times. Please give us clarity. Please give us confidence. Please bolster our faith, and please make us bold is my prayer. Amen.